This upcoming June, I'll be gathering a small circle of 5 or 6 folks who feel called to live the next solar cycle in conscious relationship with their own mortality. Rooted in the question of what becomes truly essential when we live with death as an ally, this journey offers a slow and soulful space for a wholehearted reckoning, a deepening and sweetening into intimacy, a fierce honoring of grief and fear, and a steady devotion to what is most alive. More than a program, it is an invitation to be gathered up by the life-giving heart of impermanence, held within the caring companionship of a small committed group. This is a virtual group initiation, a year-long passage into the vital mysteries of impermanence. Together we will tend to unfinished business, strengthen our intimacy with life, and mark the closing of the cycle with a ritual death and rebirth. Each month includes 2 group sessions and at least 1 individual session with me, offering space and support for both collective and personal exploration as well as integration. I trust that this container will serve as a powerful threshold experience, clarifying, humbling, and transformational, and I am deeply honored and excited to enter it with those who feel the call. I'll be sharing more details in the coming weeks, but if you feel some kind of stirring already, you are welcome to reach out for an insight call to explore whether this journey is meant for you. I'm also hosting a virtual gathering on May 31st called Rise and Revitalize, an online gathering to enliven and embrace the wild bloom of becoming. One of our guest speakers for that event is today's guest on the project, and another will be featured in an upcoming episode next week. 2 more speakers will be joining as well, and I will also be announcing them soon. I've created an early event page where you can learn more, and you'll find the link to that along with everything else I've mentioned in the show notes. And in other news, I've just launched a Substack publication called Hearthwoven. Nothing has been shared there yet, but the first introductory essay will be arriving this week. Hearthwoven will be a home for essays, poetry, podcast episodes, and bonus content, including extended conversations from this project as they emerge. It will begin as a slow burn at first, and I'd love to have you there as an early subscriber. For now, everything is freely offered with the likelihood of a modest paywall in the future to help sustain the creative energy behind all that I produce. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I'm your host, Tay Tayari, and today's guest is Azra Bertrand. We begin this episode with Azra sharing how his time alone in the Alaskan wilderness as a young man awakened his primal senses and reshaped his life path in a fundamental way by deepening his connection to Earth and to his own inner, mysterious, and magical life. We explore the long integration of those initiatory experiences, the challenges of carrying an earth-centered worldview through medical school and academia, and the way these journeys evolved into what Azra now calls biomancy, a relational, reverent way of engaging with the wisdom and magic of biology and spirit. Rather than hacking the body, Azra invites us to romance it, to court it, and to treat it as we would a river or a mountain. Azra speaks of the body as a womb or cocoon of living magic, capable of astonishing medicine and transformational processes. We reflect on healing as a path rooted not in domination, but in slowness, humility, and deepening connection. Dr. Azra Bertrand is an award-winning author, doctor and mystic, and the founder of Biomancy University, a visionary new school of embodied eco-spirituality, merging leading-edge science, somatics, and mystery traditions to heal and awaken in connection with our living planet. Azra received his medical degree from Duke University School of Medicine and conducted neuroendocrinology research at the National Institutes of Health in mother-child bonding and attachment before completing his residency in family medicine. He has written 2 books on the earth-centric feminine mysteries, studied magical practices in the Brythonic tradition and beyond, to teach and pioneer a regenerative vision for our future. If you're new to the show, welcome. You may like to know that I'm a threshold counselor with an online practice devoted to supporting wanderers, and edgewalkers. I offer individual, couples, and group counsel, as well as guidance around death and dying. If you'd like to learn more, you'll find a link to my website in the show notes. I also offer free insight calls, risk-free spaces where we can connect, explore our alignment, and see if we're a good fit to walk alongside each other through a pivotal chapter of your life. I'm always open to meaningful connections, whether for guidance, curiosity, collaboration, or simply to share in heartfelt conversation. If you feel called, feel free to reach out anytime. And if you haven't yet, I invite you to subscribe to Wild Heart Revival on your favorite podcast platform. And consider joining us on YouTube as well to tune in to the video component of these wonderful conversations. Your likes, comments, ratings, and shares are deeply appreciated, and they play an essential role in supporting the organic growth of these heartfelt conversations and stories. Now, let's turn our magical capacity for deep embodied listening toward our incredible guest for today, Azra Bertrand.
As I was mentioning before, I am very excited to get into the topic of biomancy and other related topics to that. But as a starting point, I'd love to begin in the forest of your memory, so to say, particularly with that stormy night in Alaska when the boundaries between you and the earth dissolved. And I want to bring in a few quotes of yours relating that evening to kind of set a stage, and then whatever you'd like to share in the wake of those. I think that's a wonderful way to begin our conversation. Perfect. So you said, on that long night, I was initiated by nature in all of her rawness and wild power as the storms raged around me. You say, when the background glow of civilization vanishes, perception becomes clear. Our primal senses switch on. I could no longer feel where my own boundaries ended and nature's began. You also say that your longing for union with Gaia and her natural wildness was also a longing for the untamed, wild feeling nature of my own self, my feminine or yin aspects. So for me, these emotions evoke a kind of soul initiation, certainly a dissolving of boundaries between the so-called self and the wildness of the world. And so I'd love to just hear how that particular journey reshaped your path and how you're crafting meaning of it in this moment, if you will.
Yeah, thank you. It's amazing to hear that, because I had this experience when I was 19 years old. And then I wrote about it in the book. And I probably wrote that, the book was published, Womb Awakening was published in 2017, but I probably wrote that in 2015. And so to hear it again in a fresh way, it brings it back. But when I was 19, I was living in suburban North Carolina. I was at school at the University of North Carolina around Chapel Hill and Raleigh and Durham, in the suburban kind of college and environment. And I just knew in my soul, I I'm following the steps. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, right, in society. But there's something else. There's something more. There's this calling in my soul, and I followed it to the woods, and not just any woods, but deep, wild Alaska. And so I was living in the forest. I was doing some trail work, but it was a really remote section, and it was multiple days hike, and I had to boat in food and gather or catch the other food, but I had plenty of food, but it was a wild environment, and I slept on the forest floor. Sometimes I had a tent up. If it was raining, I would have a tent, but sometimes I would just lay on the soft earth of the forest.
Mm.
And I bathed in Resurrection Bay, which was 40-degree water in the summer. If that that's pretty cold, 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And there was no, of course, electricity. There were no mobile phones. I mean, that was really pre-mobile phones for most people. And so I didn't really understand what happened when I did that for almost 3 months with very few other humans. There were occasionally other people, but very, very few. And a lot of bear, a lot of salmon, a lot of moose, a lot of, a lot of wildlife. And so my consciousness began to synchronize, and it just came into sync with Gaia, with the magnetic field of the earth. I wasn't aware of that as a concept. I mean, I'd studied it somewhere, but there's this constant electromagnetic communication, natural electromagnetic communication with the magnetic fields of the earth, with the sunlight, with the moonlight. There was nothing in between my body and that, in my mind and consciousness. And something began to morph and shift and transform. And, it was like, and I entered into an altered state of consciousness, really. I mean, at the time, it just felt, my mind felt wide or expanded, or that there wasn't really an end to me and a beginning to nature. It was in a continuum. When I was singing to the forest, as I would walk through the forest, I was, making my food and very simple fires, and it just began to live more like what our ancestors would have lived like before civilization. And as a part of that experience, I found myself journeying and taking the big walks in the wild, and following the deer trail. And I went feral, basically. It was like, and I I wound up one night on a glacier. I was at maybe 3,000 or 4,000 feet of elevation above Resurrection Bay, and of course it was on an ice sheet. And so I brought my tent up that time, and I drove my stakes into the ice. I had a like a, what do you call it, like an ice pick that has a different name, but so if you slide, ice axe or whatever. So if you slide, you can catch yourself. And and that night, gale force winds and a storm came. The 60, 70 mile per hour winds flattened. I'm in the tent, but the tent is flat. It's kind of beating on my face, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God. It's like it starts to snow, and this is in June, and there's a point at which I said, okay, I let go. I'm just in it. I'm here. I trust. And that surrender. And really, I think the whole experience for that 3 months was a deep merging, a deep synchrony, a deep surrender. It utterly transformed my consciousness. I could no longer, I had a hard enough time, honestly, fitting in the box, and even before that. But then after that point, there was no way I was going back into the normal box of being in society in the way that I was conditioned by culture and family to think about at that time. And it planted the seeds. I knew I wanted to be a healer, a doctor, and it planted the seeds of an entirely new way of doing that for me, basically. And from there, I continued on my path. I went to med school. I became a doctor and healer, but I always knew that there was a much bigger framework that would be guiding me and I mean guiding humanity really. And so it set the seed for a lot of what would come in terms of the books I would write and how the work I do now, how my career in healing began in a certain way in those woods, and had a little side stop in medical school at the NIH doing research. But the whole time, my soul knew this is we need to be go in a direction of deep ecological and cosmic integration.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
How I'm wondering how you maintained enough of that, because obviously that experience changed like the fabric of your being in some essential way. And at the same rate, I'm sure I've never gone out for 3 months, but I've been out for many days or many days in the wilderness and doing a similar thing. And what I notice is when I come back into the cityscape, civilization, is that merged consciousness, that fluid, less boundaried, flowing, connected consciousness very quickly starts to narrow, and my senses start to dull, and even my intuitive capacity starts to lessen, my sensitivity in general. Did you have that experience? And if you did, how did you work with maintaining some degree of that consciousness so that it didn't fade away?
Yeah. It was a very rocky reentry for me. So I was 19, I was in university. I didn't really know how to integrate those experiences. And so really it took me, I would say, about a decade to integrate that and learn how to take that space with me where I went. And so, and really to land my roots and extend my mycelial filaments out into the natural world and that consciousness. Eventually, I found that I just didn't want to live in cities personally.
Right.
I love cities culturally, but what I needed, what my body needed, what my biology needed was more wild in nature. And so I went in that direction. When I did my residency in Sonoma County, California, which is north of San Francisco. I lived in the redwoods. I lived in a redwood forest, and I mean, literally, it was a log cabin in a redwood forest.
Wow.
And that's what made sense to me. I would do my time in the hospitals. That was difficult. Fluorescent lights, honestly, really challenging interpersonal relations. It was a culture that was almost, in my medical training, it's almost military like. It was like, it was shocking to my soul. In the process, I became terribly depressed. I struggled. It's like, am I in the right place? There's a part of me that I know that I want to be a healer. I want to learn all that I can about anatomy and physiology in the body. I know there's this huge mystery. And of course, there are many ways to do that. And my mind at that time, I thought, well, I want to be a doctor. I want to train. This is supposedly where I'm going to learn the most. Right.
Or at least be recognized, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, because it's that weird thing. I think so many people, sorry, I'd like you to continue, but I just want to say so many folks in our culture have this, like you were talking about being conditioned before. We've been conditioned to think that the institutions and that academia hold the golden grail of the intellect and knowledge, and that if you don't go and learn from them, then what you learn isn't really valid to the society. And in a way it isn't, right? um, uh, or in a way, if you don't do that, you aren't valid. And if you go alternative routes, you're always kind of at the edges of things. And
Right.
I did 8 years of university, and I was constantly in conflict too. You use that term, it was shocking to my soul. I wouldn't have used that at the time, but now looking back, I can see how intensely shocking it was for my soul, and how I was always in conflict. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because I kind of almost feel a regret. And it's weird, right? Because fate and destiny are mysterious, and you can look back on life and see how every step you took brought you to here, and it was all essential. At the same rate, like when I think about mentoring my younger self, I would have tried to facilitate him seeing a different path rather than, right? So
Yeah.
so I'm curious how you see that now. And
Yeah. Yeah. I learned a tremendous amount
yeah.
about myself. I learned a tremendous amount about in that situation about the human body, about anatomy, physiology, looking under microscopes at our living tissue. I mean, incredible. I worked with so many thousands of people as patients, but as humans. They allowed me into their lives. They told me all their deepest stories, of their dreams. I, you know, so it was like being in a cauldron. Now, I also learned how to hold myself as a divergent soul in the midst of a machine, and how to find ways to nurture myself
Yeah.
in living as a stranger in a strange land, living behind, enemy lines. They're not my enemies, but in a place that wasn't nourishing. Now, would I do that again if I had the choice? I know enough now to know that there's a completely different way.
Yeah.
And yet I hear what you're saying is
Yeah.
that society validates doctors.
Yeah.
Society validates academy. Society validates. And I thought at that time that I needed that. I know now that all you really need is to validate yourself with all your heart, soul, and everything moves to that. But I actually probably would not have come to that lesson,
Right.
except by going through that fire
Yeah.
and learning how to be the only person, the only doctor in a sea of 1,000 doctors that thought and felt the way I did. Now, that was a long time ago now. And so the culture of medical education has probably changed a little bit at least. But the point remains, yeah, I had to look deep inside, and not just deep inside, but outside. And very naturally, my sense of community and kinship had to include the natural world. It had to include the rivers, the mountains. I sought refuge in nature. That made a lot of sense to me, and as well as other people that weren't. They were operating outside of that matrix of institutional thought, and there are plenty of people like that,
Plenty.
and plenty. And so, yeah, and it's like in the process of doing what I did is I brought in energy into Duke Medical School, and I brought in energy into the residency program I did, and that they won't forget. Honestly, they won't forget it. There's something that touched all of those folks, and they still keep in touch with me to see, well, hey, what's that guy up to? He's doing something different, and so, yeah, what a journey. For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I love that perspective, because of course it's so simple to focus on the self, and the singular soul journey. But of course, I think soul doesn't work like that, right? It's much more connected with many others, right? So you being there was also some kind of medicine, or some kind of invitation at the very least, for those other people to grow in unique ways that they wouldn't have if you weren't there,
Yeah.
and vice versa. So
Yeah. and we, there were some great folks who were there with me and trying to make sense of it all. I wasn't completely alone, and they would bring their stories to me when they would say, yeah, hey, I was working with this lady on the psych ward, on the inpatient psychiatry ward, and she was having delusions. She couldn't sleep at night because she was having delusions that there were snakes all around her. And they wanted me to give her a shot of Thorazine, a tranquilizer. And hey, you know what I did? I like we would talk about working with imagery and hypnosis and imagery and symbol. And I've had formed a medical group of alternative or holistic medical group, and we would talk about these things. And he said, yeah, I told her to check in with the snakes and see, were they against her? Were they actually good snakes? Were they, are they there to help? And she said, oh wow, they are. They're here to help. They're not nasty snakes. They're the good kind. And she was able to sleep. No tranquilizer needed. And so it's like we bring our medicine into challenging terrain sometimes, and there's I trust that purpose.
Yeah, and that terrain tempers us. It really forges our character. Yeah. So wonderful foundation here, and I think we can all have some kind of a sense of how you have come to this point now in your life where you're synthesizing all of your experience and your studies into what you're calling biomancy. And so I'd love to dive into that now. And again, like I did before, I want to share a few quotes to kind of set the stage a little bit and then pass it back over to you. You say that our body is made of magic with incredible powers of regenerative healing and intuitive wisdom. Magic is rooted in relationship, connection, and communication. Biomancy is a worldview and practicum that embraces this knowledge and sees through quantum eyes. So amongst whatever else you feel called to speak to in this moment, I'm curious to know if you might want to speak to the relational intelligence of the body and earth, as we've already kind of touched on, but as is represented in one of those quotes there. And how might this shift the ways we understand illness, healing, and even magic itself? And how do we begin to cultivate these quantum eyes you speak of, especially in a world that seems to be quite devoted to mechanistic seeing?
Yes. And so let me add a little context to begin to frame the conversation, as that I will interchangeably use different words to try to communicate something that has of the same essence. And one of the words I use is magic. And I use that word because there's a history. The word magic, there's a history there. It has certain associations, connotations, but in its essence, it means working with the natural powers of life that you don't see with the ordinary five senses. The subtle energies, the things that are in the energy realms more than the mechanical, physical realms.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could, instead of saying quantum, you could say, or magic rather, you could say quantum. You could say working with quantum physics, non-linear physics, physics that is acausal, that's non-local, that operates outside of time. Actually, there's no time in quantum physics equations. Just there's no room for time. It's
Right.
it's a completely different set of rules where you can travel faster than the speed of light. Communication travels faster than the speed of light between entangled beings, between entangled particles, between entangled souls. And it's not just the teeny tiny infinitesimally small particles now. It's small physical matter is quantumly entangled, can be quantumly entangled now. And our body, our biology, is a amazing kind of womb or cocoon of micro quantum biological terrain. And so all of these processes of quantum physics, I was taught that this doesn't happen in the macro scale. It only happens in the micro scale. But our body completely functions through quantum biology. All of our energy generation from our mitochondria, our vision, our ability, our sense of touch, our sense of smell, sense of sight, et cetera, depends on actual quantum biological processes, right? So, and so we've got magic, we've got the word quantum. We can use different words like fields, morphic fields, right? And so, but all of this points to this enormous power and healing potential and awakening potential in the energies and phenomena that are outside of the material, the mechanical, the obvious, to the five senses. And let me share a story, and then we can get philosophical too, because I really love that in thinking about the bigger pictures. But when I was at that time, I was a resident, so I was a resident doctor, and I was working with a woman who had metastatic breast cancer. It had spread all over her body, into her spine, I don't think it was in her brain, but it was in other spots, and she had a big primary tumor. And I was working with her in integrative ways. And one of the things she was doing with me was she was in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber to deliver a really concentrated dose of oxygen into her system. And along with a lot of other things, right? And so I saw her get into the oxygen chamber. And when she got out, she was beet red and flushed. And she said, "Oh my gosh, doc, I'm feeling a little woozy. I don't know what's happening." Everything was bright red. I said, "Okay, something's happening. Why don't you have a seat?" Checked her blood pressure, checked her heart rate. Things were kind of a little wild. And I said, let's just rest here for a moment. And she kind of got calm, a little less rad, and went home. And I said, "I want you to call me in the morning. Okay. Just let me know how you're doing." She called me in the morning and she said, "Hey, doc, something very strange is happening. All the little skin tags on my body, little warts, little thises and that's, they're all kind of turning red and falling off. Like I have this thing, I think it's a skin cancer, an early skin cancer. It was just kind of coming off." And I said, "Okay, I understand what this is. I want you to go back in 1 week's time. I want you to go back to your radiologist and have them do an ultrasound. I'm going to order an ultrasound of the primary tumor in your breast. Let's see what's happening." Went back, and the ultrasound technician could not find the tumor. And so the technician calls the radiologist. The radiologist says, "Oh my God, are you making me come in and do this? Because that tumor is definitely there. And I don't want to have to leave what I'm doing now, but what you're doing, you're incompetent. So I'm going to have to come in and do it myself." Couldn't find the tumor on ultrasound. Primary tumor had completely regressed in 1 week time. She then got an MRI scan. All of the metastases had regressed and resolved in 1 week's time.
Wow.
Yeah. So spontaneous remission of stage 4 terminal cancer. There was no treatment for what she had, right?
Which spontaneous remission is just a way of saying we don't know what happened.
Spontaneous remission means there is a powerful mechanism beyond the framework of what Western medicine can deal with.
And it happens often.
Exactly. And so the folks I would work with, this would happen. I would see this. It's not something I was doing. It's something that it was some kind of a magic, some, prayer, desire, sincerity, the physical treatments, the herbs, the oxygen, the good nutrition, the movement, there's an art to it, and it's real, and it cannot be explained by normal biological science, right? But I saw it all the time. And so what do we call this? And so I use these words, magic, quantum. Sometimes I say how consciousness affects us. I talk about working with the field, the templates of energy,
Yeah.
and and
How do you define biomancy?
yeah. So biomancy is a word that I chose. It's it's actually, so Sarah and I, my wife and I, we co-created this work together. And so it's something that we both, and we do all of these creations, the books and all that, we do them together. And for us, it's a very powerful process and beautiful process. And
Mm.
we were thinking about what would we call this, and we settled on biomancy. Now, the word mancy, it has a long history. So you have geomancy, you astromancy is another word for astrology, and on and on. You know, there's so many different mancies. Mancy means divination or oracular, and bio meaning life. And so I chose that word biomancy to talk about this divinatory or oracular or magical nature of biology and life. And it has these connotations or associations of old. It feels like an alchemical word or an old word, but in practice, it's about working techniques, the art and the science of working with this magic, these quantum energies, the consciousness in our body and in life. So that's what biomancy is. So it's a practice. There's a framework. There are approaches. There are tools. There's I work with breath. I work with ecology. I work with, and it became a container that was big enough to hold this. And you could use other words to describe it. You could call it kind of body shamanism or kind of eco shamanism. Words have power. The word, I love the word shaman and shamanic. It is a word from Tungus, from northern Mongolia. I wanted to bring in a word that comes from the Western tradition to approach the same territory.
Yeah, it sounds like to me it's like this creative edge of like humbling yourself to the intelligence of nature and the wildness of earth, to the laws of nature, the laws of the land, while at the same time being creative and innovative in how you relate to those laws, to that intelligence, so as to, I don't know if direct is the right word, but to guide more whole system balance. That's kind of how I'm receiving it. Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like, you can learn to surf big waves. It's brilliant. That's powerful. It's, there's a lot of energy there, and it's a co-creative process. There's a wave under you. It's a natural phenomenon, but you're learning how to work with that and direct it. And it's that. And these techniques are ancient. These humans have been doing this forever, since the dawn of humanity, and really have only more recently forgotten that in modern Western culture. But that's this idea. And biomancy, another beautiful thing about that word is that it has association. So I love poetry and how words are symbols, and there are many different layers and meanings of symbols, which is what makes them so beautiful and powerful. And so one of the words that we think of when we think of the word manse is romance. And so for me, like, I'm not a biohacker. I don't hack the code and then change it and take control of it. I don't break in to biology or ecology. I romance it. I court it. I'm in relationship. The templates of our bodies are 4.5 billion years old. We contain the kind of ancestral offspring of mitochondria, free-floating archaeobacteria that were in the ancient oceans 3 billion years ago. These are the mitochondria inside our cells. we're built on this ancient template. Our thinking mind is a newcomer. Our thinking mind is not wise. It's young. but
Mm,
but this power of memory in our body and our organs, I mean, the template of the heart as an organ on this planet is 600 million years old.
mm,
Nervous systems came onto this planet 600 million years ago. There's just a lot of memory in there. And so, yeah, let's connect, let's learn, let's open, let's listen, let's be humble. Let's treat our body as an elder. Let's treat our body as a vast sentient being that
mm,
are human, the tip of our consciousness that is human, this little tiny tip of our consciousness that is human, can learn to relate to these deeper powers, just like we might be relating to a mountain or a river,
mhm,
having that same kind of connection with our body. And so this is circling back to the question you have, well, what about this relationship, and how is magic really about relationship? And
mm,
and so for me, this is what it comes down to. It's not something, magic isn't something that we conjure up, right, on our own from our will as a separated human being to exert some sort of control on the natural world or other humans. You can do that. It won't work out very well. It'll kill the planet. It will make people traumatized and mad, and then they'll come back and hit you, and you know. But when we're in relationship, and it's sacred relationship, then all of a sudden we're just in a different territory.
mm,
And not only is it it's more beautiful, it's more
mhm,
powerful. We can't do anything on our own separated from this. We're very, I mean, it just doesn't work, right? And so all the energy's there, all the beauty, all the juice, all the good feelings from these states of synchrony with other humans, but with our own body, with a tree. It's
mhm,
just it's like everything's there.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, it really like when I hear people say like they get a diagnosis of some kind of disease, maybe it's cancer. We brought this up already, so could use this as an example. And there's this mimetic template that people will take up where they say, we got to fight this, you know? And there's this kind of like warring mentality against the cancer or against the disease or against the psychological ailment, the psychological pain. Like I do, I'm a counseling psychologist, and so I do counsel work with folks, and I'm just blown away at how conditioned folks are to see their psychological pain, first of all, as only being psychological, right? But also as being something that they need to like rid themselves of,
Right.
rather than being some
Yeah.
kind of intelligent flow of information, of invitation, some kind of thread of story that's like asking to be honored and collaborated with in order to, you know, create something more harmonious, more balanced. And so when I hear the way you're describing this biomantic orientation to health and healing, it really, for me, it flips that orientation on its head, so to say. Like, do you see that? Like when you hear people talking about like fighting their cancer, for example,
Yeah.
like that seems like it's like you were mentioning,
Yeah.
you know, if you're using magic to control another, to fight another, to dominate another, they're just going to come back at some point with
Right.
more force, right?
Yeah.
And that's the same with the ailments, the pains, the symptoms in our being, is how I see it. Is that how you
Yeah.
see it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I've been paying attention to this for 30 years, out of necessity in my own healing journey, in my own transformational journey. I didn't really have a choice. I had to pay close attention and understand these patterns to heal from suicidal depression when I was a teenager, right? I was, so from the get-go, I was doing Buddhist-inspired meditation practices when I was 17, 18, trying to find, I was started as early as then, trying to find a way through. And one of the things I've learned is that you cannot fight. It's like in a community, if you have two people with differing opinions, it's a forever war if you start fighting. Whereas if you sit down, come to Sacred Circle, you meet and you say, hey, what are you feeling? What are your needs? How do you see this situation? There's a mutual common goal on almost every situation. It's like, yeah, I just want what's best for the community. I want what's best for my family. I want what's best for me. And there's a message that's coming through always. And so the same kind of, and when you sit and counsel, you meet, and then all of a sudden the third way emerges, something magical emerges, an evolutionary branch opens. And, all of us, the whole group, the whole community, the whole body can go in a different direction, a new direction based on that sacred communication. And so, of course, it's the same in your body. You try to cut away and make a cancer cell the enemy, it's not going to go anywhere, right? You may knock it down, suppress it for a little bit. And if you try to do it that way, you're probably going to end up suppressing your own healthy cells as well. But if you say, okay, I see this as a message to my soul. What's the message that's trying to come through? I'm out of balance. My body's reflecting that. This is not meant to punish me. This is an opportunity to see something that was at a crisis level, that if I take a moment, if I pray, if I put myself to this, it could shift the evolution and trajectory of my soul and my whole lineage, the children, my children's children. If I take this moment to change this very important thing, I'm going to reconfigure my ancestral energy body, right? One of the things, as a counselor, it's like you think that it started with you, perhaps. You think that the problem was something that happened in your childhood. Of course, it makes sense, right? It wasn't, never was, it didn't start with you, it won't end with you. And I mean, it may change on account of your actions, but the point is that these patterns have been in place for generations. And so there's a sacred work we're doing here. It's even bigger than us. And there's so many people doing and saying beautiful pieces around this and contributing. I love Bert Hellinger's work with constellations in morphic fields. And So in my experience, the powerful move is to have the conversation, to listen for the message. And so this is the word mantic means oracular or divinatory. Our body is trying to give us messages. The ecosystem is trying to give us messages. We are oracular beings. It's like Earth is speaking through us. Our family system is speaking through our body. Whether we like it or not, it sometimes feels like a burden, honestly, for sensitive people. Empathic people, magical people have more of this. So we're forced to attend to it. You can't ignore it. But yes, yes. And then when you do it this way, this is when you get those quantum leaps. This is when you get the spontaneous remissions. This is when you get the whole new direction in life that opens, that was brought to you, an opportunity that came because of an illness or an imbalance or an argument or whatever it was.
Yeah. Because I just want to stay with this idea a little bit more. I feel very stimulated by it. Having the orientation to fight something, it's inherent in that orientation is like, I know what's right.
Yeah.
And that is wrong. Right?
Yeah.
And so you get into this trance of othering or wronging whatever that, if it's a person or a so-called object or whatever, or an energy or a story or whatever it is, and you wrong it and you fight it. But the thing is when you have that orientation of thinking you know what needs to happen or you know what is right, then you're not opening yourself to the emergence that is possible when you have a more receptive, responsive, and sensitive communication style with whatever the thing is that's wanting to communicate with you.
Yeah.
Right? You cut yourself off from the magic, from the beauty of emergence that
Yeah.
can be these kind of quantum leaps, so to say, where there can be this tremendous transformation into something wholly new that you could have never guessed. But you'll never get there if you're fighting a thing, you know. And I've heard Zach Bush talks about cancer in a really fascinating way, where he describes it as really being simply a miscommunication, a breakdown of communication between cells. That cells kind of go rogue and they're isolated, and so then they start to kind of, it's interesting, right? I mean, you look at parts work in psychotherapy, and it kind of is talking about this similar idea, Jungian psychology too, where when you isolate certain parts of yourself and you repress them, when you don't turn toward them and receive their messages, then they are in the dark, and then they continue to grow, but they're in the dark and they're not nourished, and then they become deformed and kind of monstrous, and then they act out from that repressed state. It's like the cancer cell is doing the same thing. And so the power of this orientation of biomancy and the magical capacities of emergence and in when there's right communication is actually so vital. And it's funny when you mention that thing of like where you learned how what's happening at the micro isn't necessarily happening at the macro. My initial thought was like, how could that possibly be so? Right? I mean, everything, like if there's a pattern playing out at some level of macro, where did that pattern come from? It must have been connected to some more micro thing, right? The cosmos is this holonic structure, so it's always expanding outwards from these essential patterns. I think is how I see it. So anyway, what am I trying to say here? I guess I'm just jamming on ideas that were present for me.
Yeah, connection, communication, relationship, conversation. I mean, cancer is it's a breakdown in connectivity. It's when one of the cells goes individual rather than breaks off a connection, and it has a message, and its message for you will save your soul, your family soul. It will save your children years of pain. It will save your children's lives.
And it might not save your body.
That's right. But your body, and this is hard for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Your body isn't the primary. It's not the most important thing. When you start to take a step back, what's perhaps more important than your body is the legacy you leave behind and the future of humanity. And so what's perhaps more important than your body is the coherence of our ecology as a whole. What's in on and on, and
which is a fundamental shift in perception that is very contrary to the overculture.
Sure. Yeah. My wife and I had a child 5.5 years ago, and so my understanding of what's important has changed fundamentally with that. And now that makes so much sense to me. Whereas before having a child, it would have been a concept more, but now it's a really felt reality of legacy, of future. But yeah, these messages, imbalance is just a message. It's just trying to communicate. It's trying to get your attention. It's like you're driving your car toward a cliff your cell, your cancer cell, saying, hey, you might want to change direction, you might want to brake, you might want to head off to the right, you might want to do something different, or the whole car's going to go off the edge. And that's what's happening. And so not listening to that, refusal to listen, whether it's in a relationship with another human or your own body or the natural world, is going to be a car wreck. There's going to be a problem. And not only that, but it's only when we can listen that creativity can really be at its peak. And so being in these synchrony states, in these symbiotic states, and I talk about our individuation and our evolution as humans as individuating into our symbiotic self. Now, when people talk about the word individuation, they often think that individuation means individual, right? You become your own individual. And the way I think about it is probably closer to the way Carl Jung thought about it, but he didn't speak about it exactly in this way. It's coming out of your ancestral family energy field or pattern and moving into something that is your destiny. So coming out of your south node, your family's energy, into what's fully your destiny. But our destiny for everyone is to be so deeply integrated with the sun, the moon, the earth, the planet around us, in this incredible symbiosis. In the same way that you see a flower blooming in a field, beautiful flower, it's gorgeous, it has fragrance, it has its own unique color, it is distinct from the other, the other creatures around it, yet its roots are completely intertwined. It's dependent on the sunlight, it's dependent on what's coming in from below, it's dependent on communication with its neighboring plants and exchange of information and energy through the mycelial networks. And that's us, of course, that's us. And yeah, I'm riffing too now.
Well, it's such an important point because it's like psychology, pop psychology really created some big waves in modern culture, and some of them wasn't all good or all bad. It was like kind of somewhere in the middle, but some of the parts was leaning more toward the spectrum of not bad, but just not being like fully supportive of being an earthling. Is I would say that individuation concept and some of these concepts that are connected to it of being well adjusted, being self-sufficient, these kinds of things that are very focused on the self. They're kind of like, it's funny because narcissism is this like big hot topic these days, but so much of the pop psychology is actually facilitating narcissistic tendencies, which is so strange to me. So I see individuation very much like what you're speaking to, and I think it has to do with a growing intimacy with life. And so, of course, a growing intimacy with your deep self, with your soul, with your heart's knowing, but then also an intimacy with the so-called other and the environment, but also intimacy with the imaginal. And we started the conversation talking about the unseen realm, the unseen flows and forces of the earthly matrix. And of course, the imaginal is such a potent way for human consciousness to engage with the unseen world. And I'm very curious for you to jam on that for some moments, like how the imaginal plays into your work, into your life.
Yeah. Well, I love the imaginal realms. And I first started working with the imaginal realms by learning hypnosis and auto-hypnosis from my mother, who's also a doctor, and who taught people hypnosis and self-hypnosis as part of the work that she did. When I was 4 or 5, I fell off some monkey bars, right, a little on the playground, and I broke my arm. And it was right before a movie I really wanted to see. It was 101 Dalmatians. And I said to my mom, she's like, she knew I broke my arm. I knew I broke my arm even, I was probably 5. And I said, I want to go to this movie before we go to the emergency room. It's like an hour long, whatever. Can we do that? And she said, yeah, I think that would be fine. Nothing's going to really change. It might hurt though. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to teach you how to modify and work with the pain signals that you're receiving. And she taught me how to do that. It was age 5. And so I got to see my movie, and and very few people, I think that's the first time I've told that story publicly. And so now everybody knows, it's like, but no one knows, like, hey, it was a little like, should you do that if you're, a parent? It doesn't matter. Of course, it's fine. But she knew what she was doing, but it opened up a fascination with magic and like getting it. When I was watching Scooby-Doo or whatever, I would watch it at 5 or 6, and like, I knew that because magic is all over pop media, books, movies, I knew there was a truth to it. Like, I got it. I felt it in my body, and I was exploring it, even from that age, and so that gave way into fiction and books and fantasy and Lord of the Rings, and understanding that these myths, that they have some of the deepest truths. These books of fiction, they're not fake. They're more real than real. We're working with symbols. We're working with myth. We're working with dreams. This is what motivates us. This has the power to move the human soul and psyche, so enormously powerful. And not just that, but working with image shapes reality. It shapes the future. It's deep magic. And so whether you're, at this point, probably every serious athlete understands that before a big match, you review it in your mind, and you see yourself doing all the moves, everything. You're just like in the flow, or you're a dancer, or if you're a public, give public speeches or whatever. You go through it, imagine it, feel it, and it does something enormously powerful. And of course, working with the imaginal is core and fundamental in any shamanic culture. It's fundamental in Tibetan Buddhist practice. It's fundamental in so many traditions. Any alchemical tradition, any indigenous tradition, magical tradition always works with this. And the work that I do in biomancy, taking imaginal journeys, right? And I'll just say, like in the Sufi mystic Islam, it's been called the mundus imaginalis, the world of working with the spirit energies, and it's actually called that, the mundus imaginalis, and or it's one way it's referred to, and so it's enormously powerful. In the work that I share with people, I put a lot of emphasis on taking the imaginal journey. I call them sometimes bio-magical journeys or biomantic journeys into our body organs, into our bones, into our cerebrospinal fluid and our fluid bodies, to learn what's there and to travel along with it and have direct communication, direct gnostic or direct, revelation of what's really happening in our body. For people who are a little bit, I'm sure everyone listening to this is like, yeah, of course. For people who aren't sure, sometimes I tell them about, well, do you know how Einstein connected with the theory of relativity? Right? You know the story. And I think
right? Was it a nap?
Yeah. Well, yeah, he was daydreaming and traveling along with the photon of light or wave of light, and taking shamanic journey with that light. In essence, it was a altered state, left his human thinking mind and had become the light, and realized that, well, there's a max speed. And when you go that speed, time disappears. And when so the theory of relativity came from an imaginal daydream shamanic journey. Period.
Love that. Yeah. Yeah. There's this amazing story. I wish I knew more details, but I know the bare bones of it, where there was this man, he was a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War, and he was a prisoner for like a long time, months. And to keep himself sane, he would practice playing golf on his favorite course back home. And he would go through all 18, I don't even know what they call those, 18 rounds. And he would hit every shot, and he'd follow the ball, and right. And he did that every day. And when eventually he was released from the war camp and brought back to the US, when he finally eventually went to that course and played, he played and he hit like a par. Like he hit like, he had this perfect balanced scorecard at the end, after not even playing golf for so long and being through all this trauma. He was able to come back and play this beautiful game of golf. And he attributed it to, of course, to imagining playing it. So always thought that highlighted such the potency and power of what you were describing before. So we're at the end here, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up this idea of you call it a biodelic reality. And of course, it connects in with everything we've been talking about. And of course, the imaginal, the realm that we were just speaking to. You say that we don't take psychedelics, we are psychedelic. That biodelics is our ancient and future magic. The neurobiology of psychedelic medicine proves that our biology is wired for the mystical, the numinous, the magical. So what is this biodelic reality you speak to?
Yeah, right. So again, words have power, and the word biodelic is a play on the word psychedelic, and psychedelic means soul revealing, and biodelic is that expanded state of consciousness that is actually innately hardwired into our biology. So if you've ever stopped and thought about it, and I've done this, I've done this a lot, is why would it be that taking a little psilocybin mushroom would send you into another dimension of experience? Is it the power of that mushroom, or is it the fact that we have neurocircuitry, neurotransmitters, neurons, and beyond that are ready, that were there and ready and primed, and it only took a little bit of a natural substance to activate these pathways that are in our body, right? Mm-hmm. And so, of course, the pathways are there. The pathways came first. And that's something it's really hard to get your head around. The same thing with the endocannabinoid system in our body. Why is it that you can smoke a little hemp, right, and then all of a sudden have this wild experience, especially now that it's concentrated? But well, it's because the endocannabinoid system is ancient upon ancient. It's ancient. These neurotransmitters that, so say psilocybin mushrooms or ayahuasca, which works on the DMT kind of pathways. These pathways have been in existence not just in humans, but in the natural world and in plants for 1 billion years, 2 billion years. If you look at how old is serotonin, so DMT is a variation of serotonin, basically. Yeah. How long has serotonin been around on this planet?
Isn't it that all living organisms have a serotonergic system?
Right. That's right. Yeah, right. So a long time. And so that's what I mean. So we're hardwired to have expanded states of consciousness. Now, you can get there really quickly and a little out of control if you take plant medicines. Awesome. They're great reasons to do that, right? You can also get there in a little bit. You have to build the muscles, right? But you can get there reliably and consistent and a little more connected to your core self by a million different ways. And so this is the arts and science of working with our biodelic, natural biodelic medicine, whether it's breath work, whether it's movement and music and rhythm and trance, whether it's working with going on imaginal journeys and on and on. And so there are, and even love states, synchrony states is it's a very powerful way to begin to access these expanded states of consciousness. And women who are giving birth are in this place, and so this is our, it is, how would I say it? It's like our original, like neuro religion. I don't know quite how else to say it. It's like it's there. It is us. We are psychedelic, and
Mm-hmm.
it's our path of spirit connection as well. There's a book about DMT. I think it's called The Spirit Molecule.
Yeah.
And interesting book. And but we are that spirit molecule. Like our bodies is not just DMT, it's our body.
Yeah. And of course it's for very important reasons, and ecological reasons at least, and this is something I think that if you don't purposely broaden your perspective and your perception in these ways we've been exploring today, you might think that psychedelics are just for people and it's for your growth and your actualization and so on and so forth. But when you recognize, no, all living organisms share these capacities to be altered by these plant medicines, and the reason is so that the functioning of Gaia, of Earth, can be more adaptive, creative, responsive, mythic in the way in which it self-organizes. And of course, we're little beautiful, important little parts of that grand play, So yeah.
It's huge. I'll say that it's that consciousness is primary. Our what we think is normal human consciousness, the ordinary waking consciousness, the operating at the beta waves, the gamma waves, and all that, is not a primary consciousness. The moment it takes a lot of energy to be in that ordinary human consciousness, and it's a deeper and more natural layer. It's like the base of the pyramid to that symbolic, deep, connected, biodelic, expanded consciousness. It's just under the surface. So anytime we put ripples on the surface and create a little bit of chaos, what opens is this deeper layer of our reality. It's really our home.
Yeah. Azra, this was fantastic. I feel just really stimulated and excited and curious and open to the magic of life in my body. And yeah, I'm just really grateful to have this opportunity to sit down with you in this way. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I feel we're on the same wavelength, so it's a great experience.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to direct people toward anything in specific that might be happening soon in your world?
Yeah, sure.
I'll share your website and stuff, but if there's anything, or anything like that.
Yeah, sure. So AzraBertrand.com, and there are a lot of resources on that, from audio essays to essays. I have quarterly free events around the equinoxes and the solstices, working with the eco magic and the biomagic and the time magic of those events. I have a year-long apprenticeship. So for folks who want to dive deep, I have a year-long apprenticeship beginning May 1st, Beltane, which is just in a few weeks. So there's a lot happening. I have in-person retreats, an ecosomatics practitioner course for the first time this year, and that's happening in the fall, and learning how to work with the panther that's in our DNA, literally the DNA, the 90% genetic homology we share with the panther, not just the panther, but all of our different eco ancestors actually are reflected in our DNA. And so there's a whole world, and lots happening.